Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 858 for February 14th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
We're whiskey people. We live it, we breathe it. It's our passion. I've got a number of amazing people in the company who work with us who, share the same beliefs, have amazing palates. We do a very good job with Elixir Distillers, for example, in the products which we are, selecting and bottling. We're very proud of that. So I think it's too early to say what style. I think the distillery needs to create a style that fits the distillery, I think is the way to put it.
Sukhinder Singh and his brother Rajbir have finally received planning permission to build Islay's 11th distillery after nearly 3 years of working with local officials and the community. Work will begin this summer on the Elixir Distillers project, which has not been officially named yet. The approval from Scotland's Argyll and Bute Council came in early December, but Sukhinder only gave his first interview on the project this week. You'll hear it here in just a few minutes on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, your voice, behind the label, and...
There's a lot of kidding, when you get into a company with some of the guys from other distilleries, it's absolutely, the quality of the abuse you get is absolutely fantastic. It's really quality abuse,
The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
Hey whiskey fans, I'm Gabriel Cardarella, brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended Scotch whisky, Dewar's. You could probably guess I've got a lot of stories, but for me, the good ones have one thing in common. They're best told over a glass of whiskey. So hit pause, grab your bottle of Dewar's, and let's get back to this episode of WhiskyCast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever go out drinking with a peacock? Always the same. Few too many, tail feathers come out, drinks get knocked over, bartender's not happy, night's over before it started. All I'm saying is, don't be the peacock in your group.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's begin with the news. An Australian distillery worker remains in an induced coma after being critically burned in a fire this past Tuesday at the Adams Distillery in Launceston, Tasmania. The distillery makes both whiskey and gin. Local newspapers report 36-year-old Greg Longmore was mixing a batch of gin when the liquid caught fire. He suffered second and third-degree burns over 50% of his body, while the fire destroyed the entire distillery, causing damage estimated at nearly $2 million Australian. Co-founder Adam Pinkard is being credited with helping to save Longmore's life. He's a trained paramedic and treated Longmore until firefighters arrived on the scene. Pinkard has pledged to rebuild the distillery. While firefighters have declared the fire to be an accident, Workplace Tasmania is conducting its own investigation. Longmore's family has started a GoFundMe campaign to help support his wife and 2 daughters. We have a link for more details in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Last time around, we projected that Scotch whisky export numbers for 2020 would show around a 20% decline from 2019 because of the combined impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and U.S. tariffs on single malt imports. The report came out Friday, and the final numbers were the worst in a decade for the Scotch whisky industry, a 23% drop in the value of exports, with a decline of more than £1.1 billion. 7 out of 10 export markets showed declines over 2019, including the 27 European Union countries, Japan, Australia, and, of course, the United States, where the 25% import tariff on single malt scotches led to a 32% drop in exports by value. Scotch Whisky Association Chief Executive Karen Betts is hoping for help from the UK government when the government's new budget comes out next month.
2020 was a tough year. 2021 is probably going to have its challenges too. If we could get rid of US tariffs, that would be a significant boost to our industry, and I think to producers across the US too.
On the tariff front, there was news out of the White House Friday that can be viewed as either good or bad news, depending on your point of view. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative declined to review the current list of European imports subject to tariffs because of the dispute over aircraft subsidies. That list comes up for review every several months, which means the single malt tariffs could stay in place until sometime this summer. However, the usual tactic in trade disputes is to shake up tariff lists periodically to keep the other side guessing. Since the Biden administration chose to not do that, while Katherine Tai's nomination to become U.S. Trade Representative is still awaiting Senate confirmation, it's also being seen by analysts as not wanting to increase tensions with Europe right now. The tariffs could also be removed sooner if there's an agreement with Europe and the UK to resolve the aircraft dispute. Pernod Ricard released its global sales data worldwide for the first half of the fiscal year this week as well, with a 4% drop in sales for the 6 months ending December 31st from the previous year. That comes as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to hurt the hospitality industry and travel retail sales. The pandemic played a key role in sales for the company's Chivas Brothers unit in Scotland. Total sales were down by 10% compared to the same period a year ago. However, that is up by 17% from the second half of fiscal year 2020 when the pandemic hit. Despite the U.S. tariffs, Chivas Brothers' sales in the U.S. grew by 2% over a year ago, on the back of strong results for the Glenlivet. Chivas Brothers CEO Jean-Christophe Coutures declined to be specific when he was asked by reporters whether the company has been eating the cost of U.S. tariffs in order to keep Glenlivet prices down. He did join the Scotch Whisky Association in calling for industry-wide assistance from the government in London.
Our industry has been absolutely hammered by the COVID context and the import duty increase in the US. And obviously, this is an industry which has been suffering twice, one from its export business, and second, from the closure of its visitor centers. It's a very large and sizable industry in the UK, which really needs some support in terms of excise reduction. The second element, which is key, is prioritizing the tariffs expansion in the US to reignite single malt export to this market. So yes, Glenlivet is doing well, but when you look in aggregate at the total industry and small players in particular, they are suffering in all their export business to the US.
Chivas Brothers is Scotland's number 2 whiskey producer. Friday's briefing was our first chance to ask when Chivas might take advantage of the U.S. decision in December to start allowing imports of the European standard 700 ml bottles alongside the U.S. standard 750s. Coutures said no formal decision has been made yet.
We are currently looking at those evolution. We are getting ready for it if necessary. And this is probably something that if it was to be implemented, will be implemented in FY22, FY23. So no decision has been made at this stage. Let's wait how it goes in the coming weeks with the new administration, and based on that, we'll make decisions.
None of the major Scotch whisky producers have yet announced plans to start selling 700 ml bottles in the U.S., though some independent bottlers have already started seeking TTB label approvals for 700s. In other news, England's Bimber Distillery single malts are not subject to the U.S. tariffs and will be available for the first time in the U.S. starting next month. The London distillery has signed a deal with Glass Revolution Imports to bring its whiskies into the U.S., and will start with 3 casks from its Country Collection series of single cask bottlings. They'll be available in select markets for around $160 a bottle. Specialty Drinks has released 2 new 12-year-old Port Escague Islay single malts. One comes from ex-bourbon casks, while the other is a marriage of ex-bourbon and sherry casks. Both will be available worldwide, including the U.S. There's no word on pricing. On the bourbon front, Heaven Hill has released the year's first batches of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof and Larceny Barrel Proof. Both carry the A121 batch designation as the first releases of the year in January 2021. No word on pricing. I received samples of both bourbons this week. I'll have tasting notes for them soon at WhiskyCast.com. One of Scotch Whisky's greatest storytellers has finally put some of his stories into a book. Jim McEwen's memoir, A Journeyman's Journey, will be published in Germany in April. He worked with writer Udo Sontag on the book and told us on Friday night's Happy Hour webcast that it was a tough experience going back through nearly 6 decades of making whiskey on Islay.
I found it very emotional because a lot of the people I was writing about are no longer with us, you know. But I enjoyed doing it, and I hope it paints a good picture of the world of distillation, because on Islay we all help each other, all the distillers. If you've got a breakdown, you just phone another distillery and they'll come and help you. And there's no rivalry on the island. We're all just glad, but we've all got good jobs. And there's a lot of kidding. You know, when you get into a company with some of the guys from other distilleries, it's absolutely, the quality of the abuse you get is absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's really quality abuse, you know. Are you still making that horrible stuff down there? You know what I mean? It's that sort of stuff. They're just taking the piss, you know. But it's good fun.
Unfortunately, the book will be published first in German, but there are plans for an English translation in the works. We want to acknowledge the passing of John Rudd last month. He spent 72 years with Berry Brothers and Rudd, following in his father Hugh's footsteps, and was managing director from 1966 until he became the company's chairman in 1985. During that period, he was instrumental in building the growth of Cutty Sark Scotch Whisky. At the time, it was the biggest Scotch whisky brand in the U.S. His daughter, Lizzie Rudd, is the company's current chairman. John Rudd was 94. And finally, if you've been active on social media at all in the last few days, you have probably seen the news that the Scotch trooper, Brett Ferenz, died this past Thursday night after losing his battle with pancreatic cancer at the age of 42. Dozens of his friends on social media changed their profile pictures this week to honor Brett, and I'm pleased to report that the GoFundMe campaign, originally set up by Clay Whitaker to help with Brett's medical expenses, has now surpassed its goal of raising $100,000. There are still bottles of the Scotch Trooper Alexander Murray & Company 1991 Brook-Laddie single malt available through lovescotch.com. The proceeds from that bottling will be added to the GoFundMe totals for Brett's wife Tiffany and his daughters. We send our thoughts out to them this week. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. If you missed the Happy Hour webcast Friday night, we did have a tribute to Brett, but since he would not have wanted us to mourn, we had a good, long, and fun chat with Jim McEwen. The on-demand replay is available on the WhiskyCast YouTube channel. This week, I'll be joined by Dewar's Master Blender, Stephanie McLeod. She also oversees the Aberfeldy, Altmore, Craigellachie, and Royal Brackla single malts for Dewar's. That's coming up this Friday at 5 p.m. New York time, 2200 GMT on our YouTube channel, the WhiskyCast Facebook page, Twitter, and Periscope. Time now for the WhiskyCast calendar of events brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling. The Whiskey Exchange is hosting an online tasting of new American whiskies this Thursday, February 18th. The Taipei Whiskey Club in Taipei, Taiwan, has a Glen Scotia tasting on the 23rd. The Whiskey Show, Old and Rare, is online this year. It's the weekend of February 25th through the 27th. More on that in a few minutes. Bonhams has its next whiskey auction in Edinburgh, Scotland, March 2nd. Tickets are now on sale for the Whiskey Obsession Festival in Tampa, Florida on April 8th, and the Nth Universal Whiskey Experience in Las Vegas, April 20th and 21st. At Glass Festivalen is set for April 16th and 17th in Oslo, Norway, and Whiskey Live Melbourne is still on the calendar for May 7th and 8th in Melbourne, Australia. Of course, all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, depending on local public health restrictions. So make sure you check ahead before making travel plans. The calendar of events is brought to you by Catoctin Creek Distilling, which not only celebrates Valentine's Day on February 14th, but it's Founders Day as well. Becky and Scott Harris started Catoctin Creek 12 years ago to put Virginia rye whiskey on the map. This week they released the 2021 batch of Rabble Rouser bottled in bond rye. It's available at the distillery's online shop and for the first time at select Catoctin Creek retailers around the U.S. Get the details at catoctincreekdistilling.com. And please drink responsibly.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
People never forget the person who introduced them to Redbreast. And then those people go on to introduce others to Redbreast, and soon the flock has grown exponentially. It's like a pyramid scheme. Without any of the bad stuff, of course.
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast.
WhiskyCast In-Depth is brought to you by the Distillers Edition collection. Islay Place as a bucket list visit for whiskey lovers has been secure for many years, and the island is about to get its 11th whiskey distillery. Work will begin this summer on the Elixir Distillers project just east of Port Ellen, after the Argyll and Bute Council gave the project the green light in early December, nearly 3 years after it was first proposed. Elixir Distillers is part of the Specialty Drinks Group, led by brothers Sukhinder and Rajbir Singh, which also operates the Whiskey Exchange shops in London and their independent bottlings business. It also promotes the Whiskey Show each autumn in London and the Whiskey Show Old and Rare, which will be held online later this month. Sukhinder Singh has not given any interviews on the distillery project until now. We talked this week about the distillery, along with local opposition from Islay residents concerned about the whiskey industry's impact on the island. After the interview, I'll share a statement we received by email this week from the Islay Community Council, which had filed objections to the project during the planning process. Congratulations on finally getting this through.
Yes, finally. We started the project probably 3 to 4 years ago. Initially, it was just like an idea. I remember my brother and myself, we were coming back from Scotland, and we were actually at Glasgow airport, and we were having a conversation. And it was just like, whiskey's getting really tough to get a hold of in bulk, to buy nice casks of aged stock. And it was like, we were getting to the point that we were worried about some of our own brands, Porterskeg, some of the elements of Islay range, some of our independent bottlings range. And it was like, why don't we do a distillery? You might think it's obvious that, everyone has a dream of opening a distillery. To be fair, we never did. We were just busy in our work, happy in our retail environment, and never really thought about it until it was just literally on the spur of the moment, let's just look at this. And it was like, fine, let's look at this. So that's really how it started 3 to 4 years ago. And we found the site on our first trip, which was really good. We saw 7 or 8 different sites around Islay. And this particular site, I just fell in love with because it's on the road from Port Ellen to Ardbeg. For me, it's the holy trinity of whiskey distillery roads. But more importantly, the site was perfect. Just perfect. It was on the coast. It was just nice. And for me, I just fell in love with it. And it was, we've got to try and get this. So, we acquired the site. We agreed a deal very quickly, which was great. And then, we started looking at planning and all the rest of it. And we just thought we better look at water first. You might think Islay, island, lots of water, no problem. That's not the case at all. We soon learned. And initially we tried to do some boreholes, which were not actually very successful. So we were like, whoa, this is not looking good. What do we need to do? So we came up with a number of options. One, of course, was we could use seawater. You have a desalination plant and use seawater. Very good, environmentally friendly, not bad. But I think there's a nice romance to having water which comes down from, the hills. So what came to my mind was we can get some water from some of the streams and rivers, but it was limited. So we came up with the idea to maybe build a reservoir. So it took us a long time to look into that. And once we decided, that was a great idea, it took us quite a while to get some more land or come up with a deal to buy some more land. So that took a long time. We had a lot of problems with one of the neighbors as well in terms of doing boreholes, so that delayed us. But we got there in the end. So we managed to find some more land and then went down the planning permission route, which, has taken us a long time for multiple reasons. I would say to you simply, the main reason was because time. We're so busy in our day-to-day finding, selling nice whiskey that, we had limited time of what we could spend on the distillery project. But then once we got into it, it became actually really exciting and really good fun.
But you had some issues with the neighbors in that respect as well with the original design for the distillery, right?
No, that wasn't the neighbors. That was the council themselves. That was the government themselves. It was interesting because we came up with something quite modern, which we felt would be really good for Islay, something a bit different. But half the planning team or a couple of the planning team were opposed. Everyone else was for. So, we were sort of stuck in the middle. So we were asked to do changes to bring it closer in line with what their thought process was. But it was quite difficult because they weren't very clear. It was just no to this, but it needs to be closer to the other distilleries. So we had a big gap of what to do or what the width to play within. So that was quite difficult. So we did changes. We went back to them. Unfortunately, it took a long time to get the answers back. So sometimes we had to wait 2 to 3 months, 4 months with a bit of chasing just to get some input as to if we were going down the right direction.
Did they want a pagoda?
We had a pagoda, but it was, I would say, a modern pagoda. I tell you, I want to do something very different. And it was nope, that doesn't work. It's okay, if you're not happy, you're not happy. There's nothing we can do.
Pagodas are a relic of the past because nobody has malting floors and kilns anymore. So you don't really need the pagoda.
But remember, we're doing a malting floor.
Okay.
So we do.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. We'll come on to that in a minute. So, yeah, that's really what took us ages. It was just really that process of back and forth, back and forth. And then we came into sort of beginning of COVID, which didn't help. So we got to a point at the beginning of the year where everyone was happy. The planners came to us and said, we're happy. We signed it off. It just needs to go to the, I guess it's called the committee, the planning committee, to actually get the final sign off. And the planning committee was delayed because of COVID once or twice. When we did get there, it became a conversation where they wanted to look at it a bit more, and they asked us to do a public consultation, which in COVID was just not possible. So that delayed us by another 6 months. You with me? In the end, they realized this is just going on and on and on. They had to do something, so they decided to do a virtual public consultation, which none of them had done before, so it was quite interesting. As you can imagine, internet on Islay is probably not the best, so it was interesting. But I think, look, everybody had their say. The planners were happy, and it was unanimous. Everyone was very pleased. They liked the new building design. Everyone was in full support. So it was just really unfortunate that there was a number of stumbling blocks, which just ended up taking ages.
How do you address the concerns from the Islay community about the impact on the infrastructure, lack of housing for new moves to Islay, things like that have been raised before and have been raised with other distilleries in the past couple of years?
Look, we're fully aware of all the concerns people had. And, we've looked at them, we've taken advice, we've worked with the council, which is the planning department, etc. And, a lot of the concerns really I know there's an impact from the distilleries, but they're more on a government level. You understand, the roads, the ferries, things like that. We've looked at all of these and, said, what can we do from our side to help? As soon as we realized the housing problem, we had included into our project 8 houses. As we went through the project, I just felt that, this is actually a really big issue. So we've doubled now to 16 houses. That's a lot, that's quite a lot. So that's what we've done from our side. With regards to the other stuff, the roads, the ferries, we're doing what we can from our side. We're working with, for example, the Islay Community Council. They approached us, they brought the concerns on, and, we've started talking to them. Of course, it's been a little early because, A, we haven't started building. A, we only got planning, as you know, literally a couple of months ago. So I've received another email, actually a couple of days ago, which I need to reply to say, okay, fine, we'll get the ball rolling. From our side, what we agreed with them was, look, we would help on initiatives. Everyone feels that, the distillers, for example, should maybe be contributing a little bit more. Yeah. They all do bits from their side. Everyone is so generous and charitable, but I think some people feel they should be doing a bit more. Yeah. So we've said, we will help, maybe lead that, we'll start dialogues. Whatever they need, we will help them do, but we can't make a decision ourselves to say this is right or this is wrong.
So you really need to hear from them what they need to help fix the infrastructure issues and to help solve the problems that we all acknowledge are there on the island. If you go there during the phase, you'll see that the population has pretty much quadruples from 3,000 full-time normally to around 12,000 or so. And you see the impact on housing, you see the impact on hotels, restaurants, the roads, everything. So they do have legitimate concerns here, and I want to make sure we give you a chance to address those because I know they've raised them.
Look, will our opening of our distillery bring more tourists? Probably not. Makes sense? The amount of tourists that are coming will be the same amount. It's just that they'll have another distillery to visit, for example. You see my point? So I think, look, there's a lot of things that need to be discussed. we've done a lot of research and we know things are happening from the government side. We know a lot of politicians or MPs, etc., are pushing this, all the time to say, this needs to be looked at. The whiskey industry takes a lot off the island. You need to put something back, But it's a joint thing, Mark. Everyone is, part responsible. But, if you talk to the distillers, they say, well, we pay our taxes. We contribute a lot to the economy. So the government needs to be putting it back. So, it's a very deep, complicated problem, which needs to be addressed. And, as I said, we'll help talk it through. We'll work with whoever needs to, or whoever is the right people, the right bodies, and just, do what we can. We've said, we will help maybe look at doing some sort of a fund, a trust fund or whatever. We've pledged that if we had got planning and once we break ground, we will donate £15,000 just as a, opening thing. What will be done in the future still needs to be decided. It's too early. I can't make any decisions because we just got planning. We didn't even know, what was going to happen. But the thing is, you have to remember, the government is sensible. They look at everything, they listen to the people, they listen to all the objections, and they look at what's right. And if there was anything which was like, this is not right, we would have listened. But, we took their blessing. We worked with them. Everything they told us either needed to be checked or needed to be done, we've done.
The 16 houses that you're going to build on the site, are those going to be for distillery workers, or will you fill them all with employees, or will some be available for rental, for instance?
The initial plan is they will be for workers. If there's anything left over, we can use them as lodgings for guests, or we can rent them out, so not a problem. Yeah, but remember, if some of them are already on the island and they have houses, then possibly they don't need anything, but yeah. I'm trying to future-proof things is probably the way I'm putting it to you. The other thing is, there's a lot of debate that, the youngsters, they grow up, they've got nowhere to go, they've got nowhere to move into. So, we also came up with an initiative maybe of doing, let's say, some sort of apprentice program, where we can maybe teach them everything to do with the drinks industry, from sales to marketing to distilling. Hopefully we'll have the right people on board who have got really good experience and, are leaders and can do that. Again, it's very early, these are ideas, these are thoughts, and they need to be worked through properly and looked at probably with the support of, the right people to say, what's the best way to plan this?
I mean, you guys don't live on the island, so you don't see the issues every day. And obviously, it's been a while since you've been on the island because of COVID. So you're trying to solve these and trying to resolve this from London.
That's what I'm saying. We have to take guidance from the people who know. We're not experts. But as I said, look, we can't solve it single-handedly. It's got to be united. It's got to be pushing the government. It's got to be pushing the councillors and do whatever needs to be done. From my understanding, there's a ferry problem. I know it's being looked at. We believe another ferry has been signed off, whether it's a replacement or signed off, I can't remember now. But, these things are being looked at, and the more pressure that's mounted, hopefully things will happen. The roads have to be sorted. It's as simple as that. And that's a government thing. They have to be sorted.
Yeah, these are things that the government has to take the initiative on. You can't build roads on the island.
Yeah. Houses we can do. We're doing our little part. I've heard there's a couple of new schemes as well. For housing, which is, again, a good sign.
So what happens now? Obviously, with COVID, there are issues around construction and getting things to the island. So where do you go from here in terms of getting construction started?
Okay, so look, we're at a very early stage. So we've still got to do all our detailed drawings. We're supposed to have a couple of meetings. And as you say, in COVID, it's quite difficult. You can do them virtually, but I think it's very different to doing face-to-face, especially of something of this scale. So that's going to delay us a little bit. How long? Hopefully not too long. We've got two elements. We've got all the groundworks, and then we've got the actual construction build. So we're looking at it in two parts. I'm hoping, as long as there's not too much of a drastic effect from COVID, we can start July, August, September, something like that. That's what we're hoping. Yeah. And then I think the groundworks will take probably 3, 4, 5 months, and then we can start the build. So the good thing is we've got, a good 8, 10 months to plan the rest of the building design, get all the tenders in, what we need, so on and so forth. Got a lot of research to do now. We're bubbling with ideas, but, we need to think it through and really consolidate it and refine it to exactly what we're going to do.
How soon do you hire a distiller? Is it important to have them in as part of the process?
I think from our understanding, yes, it'll help. Definitely help. I think to have a distiller's input as to, plant especially, and how the plant is laid out, how the plant functions, should it be manual, should it be automated, computerized? Everyone has their own view. So I think it is beneficial. We have started that ball rolling as well. We're in discussions, and I need to get back to certain people. So I'm hoping by the time we start, we will have a good idea of hopefully who can be that person.
So you mentioned you're going to have a malting floor. What else is going to make this distillery unique?
I didn't say unique. Look, malting is traditional. It's fine. It's a dying art, but a lot of us believe in it. A lot of us believe in, what would I say, old style whiskey, which we're all in love with. So I think for me, it was a must. There's a lot of elements you can look at and say, how important is that? How important is that? How important is that? And, they all have their benefits, but I guess if you overcomplicate things, there's no point. So I think that's what I'm saying. We need to sit down and actually decide what we're going to do. So maltings is a definite. We're hoping we can achieve 60, 70, 80% floor maltings of production, which is very high for a 1 million litre distillery. So that's very important for me. And that also contributed to the vast size of the buildings of the distillery itself, because, you need 2 big malting floors. So, yeah, that's really important to us.
What type of whiskey do you want to make? And is it anything like anything else that's already being made in the island? Do you have any models for what you'd like to sort of create?
I think, look, we all like, as we say, the traditional style, the old style. I think the important thing is, Mark, we're whiskey people. We live it, we breathe it. It's our passion. I've got a number of amazing people in the company who work with us who, share the same beliefs, have amazing palates. We do a very good job with Elixir Distillers, for example, in the products which we are, selecting and bottling. We're very proud of that. So I think it's too early to say what style. I think the distillery needs to create a style that fits the distillery, I think is the way to put it. We can look at, I could argue that I love Vermont and I love Lagavulin and I love Ardbeg and I love Springbank and I love Longmorn, So, you take all these things, but you can't make everything. Or you can't put probably all of those things in one whiskey because it'll be very different probably. So I think it's just, for me, it's going to be the initial experimentation, I think is going to take us a long time. What I find is some distillers or some new distilleries, within 2-3 weeks, they're like, got it. We know what we're doing. We've got our spirit. Let's crack away. That scares me. I believe it needs to take months of research, just to see what you want to create. The other important thing is that it's all well, that's what the spirit is like. How is it going to mature? We can only tell that by putting it in wood, waiting, 2-3 years, checking it, tasting it, making tweaks, waiting another 2 years, making tweaks. So I can't even say to you, we're going to bottle a 3-year-old. Absolutely not. It might be 5, might be 8, might be 10. I just don't know.
When do you decide on a name for the place, or have you already decided?
We haven't, Mark, no. I think for us, there was nothing obvious, which really appealed to us. So now that we know we've got planning, it's something we're going to start looking at soon, but no idea at the moment.
And you've got a few years before you actually have to put something on a bottle.
Correct. Exactly.
How important will it be for you to have visitors at the place once COVID is knocked down?
I think, look, it's an important part of the distillery today, that interaction with the people that actually consume your product, to get their feedback, to show them what you're doing. I think it's really important. So, to have a visitor center, tour is very important. I think one thing which was very important in designing the distillery was the flow. Of course, the old distilleries were put together piecemeal. As they expanded, they put another building on and another building on. So they have a charm that you're going in one door, out another door, and that's nice. But we wanted to do it so that actually there was a nice flow to it. You could see a lot, feel a lot, touch a lot. So yeah, that's really important, very important. I think we would love to do some sort of a whiskey bar as well, as a homage to Islay. I know there's a number already on Islay, but something a little different, especially focusing on old bottles and all that, which is, my love, and maybe a little restaurant or something to go with it. So yeah, these are all ideas at the moment.
Maybe a Islay branch of the Whiskey Exchange?
Possibly. Yeah.
Are you going to warehouse on the island too and mature all your whiskeys on the island? Or are you going to take it off the island? Any plans on that yet?
We haven't looked at it, Mark. I think, again, just getting the distillery for us was the important part. So we want to look at everything one stage at a time. So again, this is something we're going to start looking at soon. We will, again, work with the council in terms of determining, is there enough space? They're very particular about how warehouse buildings, are located. So I think to have a few warehouses on the site, I'm sure should be fine. Concerning the rest of it, at this stage, we don't know. My feeling is it'll be part.
This is really a story that's going to be developing over the next several years for you guys.
Yeah.
How excited are you right now?
Honestly, we're very happy. We're very excited. But I think when you're busy with work, you sort of forget about it until you sit down and said, all right, come on, boys, let's spend a bit of time on this now. And then suddenly everyone's boosted again with full of energy to say, yeah, this is really cool. And I think, when you're looking at each part, each stage, it's different. I think that's where, everyone puts their expertise in or their experience in to say, what about this? What about that? How about this? How about that? They said we're going to be mindful not to get carried away, but I think it's really exciting. I think we're very happy at the moment. I want to go to the island. I think that's the way to put it, just to touch the land and say, yeah, we're here. But unfortunately, we can't at this stage.
And you talk about not getting carried away because there is a budget for this thing. Have you figured out how much you're willing to spend?
I think, look, this is a dream. And I think we have to go with the flow. Of course, you need to put budgets. And I've got a very sensible project manager who keeps reminding me, saying, wake up. So it is substantial. I think the main thing is because it's a new build, you have to remember the Islay factor. We're on an island with, very few materials, very few resources. So everything has to be brought in. That increases the cost considerably. So yeah, we're very mindful of that. But on the other hand, I want to get it right. I want to do what we've dreamt of now. I just want to get it right so that we can produce what we want to produce. You had asked, what else are we doing which is different? So the other idea was, which was always there from stage 1 4 years ago. So we're going to really have 2 distilleries in one. Okay. So we're going to have 2 pairs of stills, traditional, doing single malt whiskey, our core product or core products, whatever. And then we're building a micro distillery for experimentation and to do possibly other spirits. Yeah. Again, one thing I love and, getting more and more into at the moment is rum. I think it's quite an exciting time for rum. And you can I believe you can do some very interesting things with rum. I know we had initially said we would look at doing gin, but probably we are not going to do gin. I think we're going to stick to dark spirits. So that's the plan at the moment.
And you have at least 3 stores that are going to be willing to sell your whiskey when it's ready,
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. 4, you forgot online.
That's true. How has business been for you guys with the pandemic? Are you seeing an increase in sales just from people not getting out to the shops? How is it in the shop too?
Look, it's been extremely busy online. Online's been pretty phenomenal. There is now a shortage of stock. I've got no Lagavulin 16. We're low on Ardbeg. We're low on a number of other brands, including Balvenie. So it's getting tough. I think the distillers held in as long as they could. But generally not bad. It's been pretty good. Of course, trade has suffered. Hotels, bars, restaurants has been zero. The shops have struggled and suffered, but we've kept them going 3-4 days a week rather than full time on restricted hours. And I think the local community appreciates that and they're happy. At least they've got a place to go to quickly pick up something and go home. But you're right. I think with people being at home, having more time, spending more time on their hobbies, including whiskey. So generally people are spending more, correct.
And I saw that you've also decided to move the Whiskey Show Old and Rare virtual this year so you could still hold it later this month.
Yeah.
What are the plans for that? Because I know that's your baby, really, because I know how old you are. I know you're into these really old whiskeys and really rare things.
Yeah, Mark, so same. Again, we would have loved to have done a physical show. But we pushed it, and in November we had to make our mind up, and we said this is not going to happen. So then we came up with the plan, which was all 3 partners, and my colleague Angus and Johnny would both come down here to London. We would sit here in the boardroom, and we would invite a couple of guests, so 5-6 of us, and then we would host an array of tastings between the 6 of us, or changing the guests. And I think it would have been really interesting, a lot of banter. So it was more relaxed, asking questions, leading on to different topics. And that was the gist of it. Because of the restrictions in the UK, there's no traveling, no mingling. So we're having to do it fully remote. So my colleagues are going to join in virtually, and we're still going to do it. So we are doing 3 core tastings. So we all put 2 bottles each, so 6 whiskies per tasting. One of them is waxy style whiskies, one of them is Old Peat, and one of them is Longmorn. And then we put in a 4th class, which my other colleagues are doing, Diego and Billy, and Jason, which is old Gordon MacPhail vintages, which for me are still great value for money, for 50, 60-year-old whiskies. So yeah, we're very excited. The lineups are really cool. The class is on sale and actually selling extremely well. And I'm sure we'll sell out within the next week on all of them, which is really good.
If not sooner. And then you're still hoping to hold the regular whiskey show in person, right?
Correct. Well, the plan is, again, Mark, to do both elements. So, we did the virtual element last year. Pretty crazy, pretty wild, something different, something we all learned from. But I think, we can take that forward as well. So we're going to run the 2 shows in conjunction with each other. So I think we'll do the physical first, and then probably a few days later after the show finishes, we'll do a virtual element. Because, there's so many people around the world who are just would love to be there, but for, various reasons are unable to. So I think it'll be pretty cool.
Wrapping up with your record as a collector, have you found anything interesting during the pandemic that's become available that maybe somebody's trying to get rid of that you've picked up on? Did you find anything good?
You know what, Mark? It's an interesting question. I guess because of the pandemic, unfortunately, some people have had to go through their cupboards and say, you know what, I've had this for a long time, I need to sell it. So to be fair, there's a lot of stuff which has come out over the last 6 months. Honestly, a lot. And I think with people having a lot of time on their hands, prices are really, really going through the roof. which is really interesting. The answer to your question is yes. I mean, I'm actively looking. We buy for ourselves, we buy for my collection. We've got a lot of people approaching us. So there's always something coming through. I thought to myself a good 2-3 years ago, hey, I've got a cool collection. I've got a lot of stuff. Fortunately, there's not much else I need. It doesn't stop. Honestly, I still find every week 2-3 new bottles, 4-5 new bottles, and it's just like, wow. I've got something in the pipeline, which is a beautiful old bottle of Royal Lochnagar, single malt, from probably the turn of the century. Never seen it before. Quite excited, but it's not in my hands yet.
As I mentioned earlier, there were objections to the Elixir Distillers project on Islay from members of the local community during the planning approval process. The Islay Community Council filed objections to both this project and Diageo's plans to revive the old Port Ellen distillery. I contacted the council for an interview and received this emailed response from Council Secretary Jim Porteous. Quoting now, "We have noted that the distillery project has received planning approval subject to conditions and have sent our congratulations to Elixir. It is now time for us all to move forward constructively, and we have offered to provide any assistance that we can to help ensure that the outcome, so far as may be possible, will ultimately be to the benefit of all. The Community Council has no objections in principle to any such projects, but does consider it important that sufficient infrastructure funding provision should be made available by the relevant authorities to keep pace." The Council has not made anyone available for an interview. Our offer remains on the table to talk with someone from the Islay Community Council in the future. That is WhiskyCast In-Depth, brought to you by the Distillers Edition collection lineup of single malts from Diageo's Classic Malts. Look for the new 2020 editions of Oban, Talisker, Lagavulin, Cragganmore, Dalwhinnie, and Glenkinchie at a whiskey shop near you. Get all the details at malts.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. One of the specialty drinks lines is the Single Malts of Scotland range, and I received a sample recently of their 23-year-old Imperial Single Cask. Cask number 2298 was bottled at 45.4% ABV. The nose has notes of dried flowers, hints of oak and sawdust, honey, ginger, and vanilla. The taste has a citrusy tartness with notes of vanilla, ginger, and honey, while the finish is long and tart with citrus fruits and a hint of dried flowers. I'm scoring the Single Malts of Scotland Imperial 23-year-old single cask an 89. The cliffs of Yesnaby are one of the stunning sights of Scotland's Orkney Islands. Back in 2018, Highland Park named one of its Keystones series single malts after the cliffs. The Yesnaby single malt was only available to members of Highland Park's inner circle outside of the U.S., and I did not get a chance to taste it back then. However, I was gifted a sample recently, and I am kicking myself for not writing down at the time who gave it to me. If you're listening, thanks again. The whiskey came from 3 first-fill sherry-seasoned casks filled in 2005 and was bottled at 58.9% ABV. The nose has hints of toffee, toasted caramel, vanilla, sandalwood, and a touch of burning leaves. The taste is sweet and spicy with notes of brown sugar, clove, and hints of chili powder and peat smoke. The finish long and well-balanced between sweet, spice, and smoke. I'm scoring the Highland Park Yesnaby a 92. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. Want to find out how Sagamore Spirit is reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye? Well, in-person tastings are available once again at the Distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. In fact, they're offering WhiskyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. If you buy a bottle from your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each product. Visit sagamorespirit.com and use the code WhiskyCast, all one word, to access the tastings. Please drink responsibly. It's interesting to see what difference a cask finish can make to a whiskey. The Dram-Moore Group gives us a chance to do just that with 2 9-year-old Glenrothes single cask bottlings that started out in refill casks for their first 8 years. Cask number 2850 spent its final 4 months in a Spanish red wine cask. It was bottled at 55% ABV. The nose has notes of raspberry jam, dried fruits, almond oil, and lime zest, with just a hint of spices. The taste is full of crystallized ginger, honeycomb, chocolate, and orange slices, while subtle spices start to come alive near the finish. That finishes long with touches of clove and allspice, along with dried fruits. I'm scoring cask number 2850 a 91. On the other hand, cask number 2851, filled right after that first cask, was finished for 4 months in a Muscatel cask. It came out of the barrel at 58% ABV. The nose on this one has notes of dried fruits, red apples, vanilla, toasted oak, and butterscotch. The taste is full of barley sugar and honey, along with dried flowers, allspice, and just a hint of raisins. The finish has touches of ginger, raisins, oak tannins, and citrus. And with a slightly overall better balance, I'm scoring cask number 2851 a 92. It just shows the difference you can get between 2 almost identical casks. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,100 whiskeys at whiskycast.com. Check it out this week.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Gabriel Cardarella again, the Doers guy. I've seen a lot in my years as a brand ambassador for the world's most awarded blended scotch. Like the time I got to host a Doers tasting for some members of a major European royal family. Now, I'm not going to say which one, but they did invite me to come stay at their castle. Pretty cool, right? Well, here's another story for you. In 2019, our master blender, Stephanie McLeod, became the first woman to be awarded Master Blender of the Year by the International Whiskey Competition. And a year after that, she won it again. Stephanie's first creation for Dewar's 15 year, is another piece of history. Sweet, floral, with notes of honey and toffee, a perfectly balanced addition to the Dewar's lineup. It's a great introduction to Scotch for beginners, and it's more than complex enough to satisfy whiskey aficionados. So grab some Dewar's 15, call some friends, and make a few stories of your own. That's what a good bottle of whiskey is all about.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. Had a lot of feedback after we posted the Elixir Distillers story on the WhiskyCast website this week, much of it critical of the Argyll and Butte Council for approving the project, like this tweet from @JimmyMac17. Around 200 locals registered objections to this distillery. The island infrastructure is overstretched, housing, roads, electricity, water, ferries, broadband, and almost zero unemployment. The council ignored all this and even allowed them to use fossil fuels. Well, for the record, the council's entire planning docket for this project is available on its website, and I included a link to it in our story on whiskycast.com. It shows only 23 separate objections to the distillery, including the one I referred to earlier from the Islay Community Council. The original application that was filed in 2018 had 12 objections, with some of the same people objecting in both cases. Objections, Jimmy? Yes, but nowhere near 200. Last time around, I announced our Whiskey Club of the Month, Club 101 in Hudson, Quebec. And the club was nominated by Tyrone Coty, who lives in Nova Scotia and isn't even a member of the club. Larry Onions is one of Club 101's leaders, and this was his tweet after he found out. What a great honor for our little whiskey club. Thank you, WhiskyCast, for selecting us. Thank you, Tyrone, for nominating us. And thank you to all of our friends in the whiskey fabric that make it such an amazing experience for us all. Once again, congratulations, Larry, to you and the rest of the club. Just one of the many comments on social media this week over the death of the Scotch trooper, photographer Brett Ferenz. This one came from @NevilleM on Twitter. Didn't know the guy, never interacted with him, but I loved his work, and I'm crying over a keyboard. There's a book of memories being put together for Brett's daughters, so they'll be able to remember the impact their dad had on whiskey lovers around the world. If you have a story or photos you'd like to share about him, you can email them to scotchtroopermemories, all one word, @gmail.com. Lots of comments also on Friday's Happy Hour Live webcast with Jim McEwen, like this one from Catherine Sikora of Austin, Texas. This has been amazing, just sitting here enthralled. Thanks, Jim, Mark, and everyone who made this possible. Thank you, Catherine, along with everyone who joined us and asked questions. We went almost 2 full hours with Jim on Friday night, and probably could have gone at least another half hour or more if it hadn't been so late for Jim on Islay time. If you have something you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can always get in touch with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @WhiskyCast. My email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and the other things that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. The late Dave Pickerel used to refer to rye as the brat of grains because it creates a lot of challenges for distillers. Rye mashes can stick to the inside of pipes and stills, foam up during fermentation, and during mashing, a rye mash can become so thick that it's almost like oatmeal. You've probably heard me refer over the years to MGP's famous 95-5 rye mash bill. That's 95% rye and 5% malted barley. The malted barley doesn't solve all of those issues, but there is one thing it does really well. The malting process, as we know, converts starches in the grain into sugars that can later be converted into alcohol. But malting also releases enzymes in the grain that help make mashing and fermenting a lot easier. But what if you want to make a 100% rye whiskey? That's where science comes in. Laboratory-created enzymes can take the place of those in the malted barley, and there are commercially produced enzyme cocktails that are commonly used in distilleries. However, one of the largest producers of 100% rye whiskey is Beam Suntory's Alberta Distillers in Calgary. General Manager George Tycrobe told me recently they produce their own enzymes in-house.
One of the things that makes us so unique in working with 100% rye is we have our own enzyme lab. And that is something that, when you visit us, you would have seen our Gluck reactors. That's something that when you go to a commercial enzyme, you struggle with rye. And anybody that's distilled 100% rye grain is going to notice that right from the point of mashing right through fermentation that they're going to run into issues. And foaming is the number one thing that we hear a lot of distillers talk about. But when you have your own enzyme lab and you can create a cocktail that is specific for the proteins and the way rye interacts, that sets us apart. That's something that is so unique to our process. For the expression of an Alberta premium, for example, no, there's no malted grains that we use in that. But when you have somebody that can create the enzymatic process from producing the culture itself, it eliminates the need for that. And this gives us the right temperature, because rye grain and mashing takes a different temperature, and you have to control that temperature. And there's not a lot of tolerances allowed there. So having these reactions from our chemists, what they develop, just make sure that we have that consistency and we approach it the correct way right up until we get it into the fermenting stage. And then the fermenting stage too. It's not, typically you'd run 72 to 96 hours on a fermentation batch, but our rye is very finicky in where it is, and they've got that process down. That's that malted grain. We can do it, but it is not our norm.
By the way, enzyme use varies from country to country. It's legal to add enzyme cocktails in the U.S. and Canada, but they are banned completely in Scotland and other countries. Instead, distillers could use malted rye. The malting process produces similar enzymes in rye as it does with barley. But it is a lot harder to source malted rye in bulk. And, of course, only a handful of distilleries in Scotland still have their own malting floors. If there is something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers, bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes, all the way back to 2005. We love to hear from you. You can always get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast. The email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Hiya, Mark. How's my favourite Redbreast fan doing? Look, I'm going to address the elephant in the room right away. We both know your podcast is dying for a co-host, and I know just the lad who can be the Robin to your Batman. How's that for dropping a hint?
Proud sponsor of WhiskyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
At Dewar's, we love a good story, and that's why we're always writing new chapters. Like our Caribbean Smooth whiskey finished in rum casks, or Ilegal Smooth finished in mezcal casks. As a 174-year-old brand, we could rest on our laurels. Instead, we'd much rather continue writing, because when you keep telling the same old story, that's when people stop listening.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.